With the power to bring people together or just help us escape the world, gaming is more than just a game. So join me, ziggychris, as I speak to developers, content creators, and gamers like you and me to discover how each of us was saved by gaming. Welcome in everyone to Saved by Gaming, where, as always, life is more than just a game. I am ziggychris, and with me today is someone I'm very excited to speak to. They are a clinical psychologist who also works with Take This, focusing on developing resources to help the games industry build safe and engaging communities. She co-authored the book Therapeutically Applied Role-Playing Games. In her clinical practice, Dr. Kilmer uses games like D&D, Minecraft, and Animal Crossing to support insight, growth, and change with her clients. So, welcome in, everyone. Elizabeth Kilmer, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No problem at all. I'm super excited because the main thing before we get anywhere else that I need to discuss is the fact that this whole podcast, this whole thing is built on the facts of the positive power of gaming and the ability for games to save people. I know that's like a big term in terms of positivity. And so am I speaking nonsense, Elizabeth, or am I onto some, like, clearly not, because you have a job doing this kind of thing. So am I talking nonsense? Do I need to change the name of the podcast, or are we onto something?
You don't need to change the name of the podcast. It's very catchy. And I think it's broad enough, right, in terms of when we think about what does being saved mean. And there's a ton of evidence across a broad range of people and games that games can have a really positive impact on people's lives. Obviously, not every game and not every person is going to have that kind of positive intersection. But for a lot of people, there has been a lot of really powerful change and community building, something that we've seen really explode throughout, especially the early days of the pandemic in 2020 as well.
Yeah, gosh, that takes me back. And I'm thinking about literally playing Pandemic during the pandemic, because obviously they had a massive surge in sales for one reason or another. But from your studies, your research, everything else you do, in terms of breaking that down a little bit, and I might get terminology wrong because I am obviously not as medically minded, but what do you think are the key kind of psychological things that make games such a potent tool for good mental health, whether it's agency, immersion, social connection? What for you do you think is like the key elements that come into it?
Absolutely. I think there's a pretty broad range of kind of key elements depending on the genre that we're talking about, depending on the kind of setting. But the things that really come up kind of time and time again are these opportunities in engagement and collaboration with other people. This opportunity for like play is incredibly important, broader than just like games themselves, because games have this kind of structure and this rule and these clear goals. Play is a key way that humans and some other creatures evolve, but humans especially learn how to do real world things. When we are playing, we get opportunities to engage in problem solving. We get to engage in really kind of complex thinking. We get to engage in a whole lot of different kinds of social interactions, and the consequences are really low, right? You don't get fired from your job. You're not going to score poorly on a test at school if you make a mistake in a game. And it gives you the opportunity to try again. And so this is a space in which like play is fun, it is engaging, and it has low consequences for failure. And so when we add that into this more kind of like structured rule set that is a game, we see that as well.
Okay. So that makes sense. So when you're working with people, because obviously you, as I mentioned at the start, you use games or have used games in different elements of supporting people. Can you give an example of how that works, whether it's Minecraft with youngsters? Can you break down how that works as a strategy? Because obviously for some people listening, that's what are you doing? You're playing a game. I get it. But just from a more medical point of perspective.
Absolutely. So obviously any information that I share around what's happening in practice, I'm going to make sure that none of that information is identifiable. I'll change some details as needed. The core of the story will remain the same. And nothing that I'm saying right now is specific medical advice for any individual. I'm a therapist, but not your therapist, not the listener's therapist. This is just for educational purposes. One of my favorite examples of the way that I've used a game was actually relatively, again, early on in the pandemic. I had a fair amount of clients that were coming in around like needle phobias. So like fear of needles, wanting and needing to get access to vaccines and really having a lot of anxiety around that. And good news is psychology, we're so good at dealing with phobias. So we do some like gradual exposure There's some stuff in your imagination, there's some education, but it's basically a space where like we just work on getting you more and more comfortable to the thing that you are afraid of. So for needle phobia, that can involve things like watching videos. It's usually like nurse training videos about how to do injections, learning some different kind of coping strategies to deal with that kind of emotional regulation. And then also doing what we call imaginal exposure, which is like I'm in my head thinking about and practicing what it is going to feel like, what it's going to look like to get up in the morning and get dressed and get in the car and go to the doctor's office or the pharmacy and sit in the chair and wait and then have the technician come in and have them give that injection. And so that kind of practice, what we're doing is we're getting your brain bored, right? We're getting your brain so used to this thing that it's okay. It's not fun, right? We're not going to make injections fun, but we're going to make them less scary because we're going to make them so boring and routine that your brain does not care. Now, as you might imagine, a lot of the work that we're doing is somewhat aversive because you don't like needles. And the goal is to make things as boring as possible. We don't like to engage in things that are boring. I had a client that really loved Animal Crossing, liked to play Animal Crossing every day. And so one of the things that we did was this imaginal exposure that they were supposed to be practicing every day. And have you ever tried to get a 12, 13, 14-year-old to practice something that's boring and a little bit aversive every day for 10 to 30 minutes? It's often not very successful. But we were able to combine this with Animal Crossing. So they have their house, they built out the doctor's clinic, and every day they would like practice getting up and picking out their outfit and going and eating breakfast and then going to the doctor's office and sitting on the little table and talking through in their head what was going to happen. So we were able to combine this interest that they had in the game itself. It allowed them to have a little bit of extra screen time, which they were always a fan of. And what also allowed us to combine this thing that they enjoyed with this thing that was somewhat aversive.
Okay. Yeah, my kids aren't quite 12 yet, but I was picturing my 9-year-old and trying to get her to clean her bedroom because there's no chance. So I got where you're going with the whole boring task thing. Yeah, not easy. That's awesome. And Animal Crossing you mentioned, by the way, has come up quite a bit on this pod with people. We'll probably jump on it later at a certain point. But yeah, it's definitely a game that comes up in terms of people's comfort blanket, I think, in terms of that safety net. Do you come across that a lot? Do you use it a lot, that particular game?
Yeah, I think for this particular intervention, like Minecraft could have also been used and Stardew Valley could have also been used. Basically, like some kind of game where you have enough, The Sims could have been used, like where you have enough control of the environment that you were building that you could build out some facsimile of a doctor's office in your house and something that's interesting. But when it comes to other kinds of interest or skills that we might be working on, there are going to be some games that are better suited than others. Animal Crossing is a really popular, cozy game. There are a lot of elements of the game that are pretty like inherently pro-social by design. There's not a lot that you can do to cause havoc or distress to a lot of the villagers, or most of the engagement is not this kind of zero-sum game. Like you are trying to like make your island better and help people. And so that definitely is something that we see come up a lot in terms of those comfort games, but also games that can be a really positive experience of playing with other people.
Yeah, and in terms of playing with other people, because there's there's the solo experiences which you've referred to, and then there's the more community aspect of playing with others, whether it's tabletops or whether it's online. And if I spoke very early on in the podcast, my first episode, about how when I used to be a WoW player, being part of the WoW community at a very difficult time in my life, that community helped me get through some tough times. And I've spoken with people who have used D&D working with veterans or working with homeless people to help share traumatic, because they get a moment to connect through each other, where they're not necessarily always just playing the game. You're having those conversations, you're intermingling around a group thing. And I hope I'm not taking words out of your mouth, but do you use that sense of community or those moments of play as well?
Yeah, that sense of community is incredibly important. Like you mentioned, D&D used in kind of group therapy interventions. So I had the opportunity to run groups with ages 8 to 86, not in the same group, but different groups. And I worked with children who've experienced trauma. I've worked with military veterans. I worked with adolescents and adults with ADHD and autism and social anxiety. And there are a couple of really powerful things about group therapy experiences generally that we can really enhance when we bring in a collaborative storytelling game like D&D or another TTRPG. So one of the first things is that oftentimes when we are dealing with any kind of distress or mental health related thing. So this could be substance use, this could be trauma, this could be depression. There's also often the sense that like we are alone in our challenges and that we are somehow broken in some kind of special and unique way, and we cannot be understood by other people. We will not be loved by other people. We are not deserving of kind of respect and connection. And therapists are great. I'm a therapist. I love therapists, but it is often less powerful to hear from your therapist that you are worthy of love and respect and you are not just inherently broken than it is to hear that same kind of messaging from a peer who either is going through the same things or has gone through similar experiences. In part because like it's your therapist's job to be there and be helpful. And so if somebody else who doesn't have this reason to show up and be nice to you is telling you that you matter and that you're important, that is going to often be more meaningful.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Again, themes that crop up through episodes so far, we talk about finding your tribe, about
Mhm.
connecting with like minds. And also, I think we talk about the fact that sometimes the most important part of those sessions even is like snack time or the bit before where everyone's just connecting because you are coming for those moments to highlight each other and have a moment of celebration. Hopefully everyone gets their moment of spotlight around the table to have their
Yeah,
hero moment, but also just the little bit of rapport of, yeah, everyone loves a cake and a bit of a time
I
to
think
natter.
that there's a really key piece in terms of that snack time. Like you don't get to those good snack times. You don't get to those good kind of moments of downtime without building that rapport. And games are a really key piece where we can build that rapport, right? You've got this opportunity, whether you're playing WoW, whether you're playing D&D, you are working with a group to complete a shared goal. And there are going to be a mix of skills and people that are required often to complete that goal most successfully. If your healer or your tank or your support is not there that week, that is going to meaningfully impact the way in which y'all have to approach solving those problems. And so when that person
Mm.
comes back the next week, there is clearly this sense of, oh man, like we missed you and we needed you and like you mattered. And that is a really important message for a lot of people to hear because they may not hear that in a lot of other places. They may feel more like a just replaceable cog in a wheel. And so having that opportunity to have that kind of experience and reflection in a gaming space can really help to build that rapport.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir because you're talking to a holy priest. So that's that. I totally get it. We are, plus, we're not appreciated enough sometimes. Just going to say that out loud.
You just sort of miss a session now and then.
Exactly. It's always the healer's fault. So obviously, before we go further into this, in terms of how you got into this, obviously, how do you, I'm presuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong and give us a bit of insight, but to want to use games, and you're into clinical psychology and games as therapy and all this kind of thing. So for yourself, I'm going to hope or presume that at some point growing up, games was a thing for you that kind of drove, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And was there a turning point where actually games helped you growing up and that led you on this path? Or please
Oh yeah,
expound.
absolutely. The family I grew up in, we played more of risk and life kinds of board games, but on the video game side, I started playing the Mist and the Ridden series really young. It was something where it was like a whole family thing where like we had a whole notebook and like my dad was like the driver and in charge. But it was a really great way for us to connect. I definitely fought less with my siblings when we were trying to figure out a puzzle than when we were just coexisting in the same space and arguing over what TV show we wanted to watch. So that was something that was really awesome. I also got to start playing like Age of Mythology and Civilization. I put so many hours into Civ 3, and I really loved just the opportunity for strategy and getting to tinker and understand. My brother and I were both really into both of those games, but had a really different play style. His was a little bit more methodical. He really liked going and learning all of the things about it, and I thought that was boring and just wanted to play around and figure out and see what happened and break things until I could figure out how to fix them. And so both getting to engage in those games and learn and grow and connect with both some of those stories and some of those strategies, but also gaining a little bit more recognition about different problem solving styles and how you can get to potentially the same outcome. So that was something that was really powerful for me growing up. And then as I made it into grad school, that was my kind of first exposure to D&D. And I had the chance to go to a PAX and learn about some guys up in Seattle that were using D&D to help with social skills. And my partner, now spouse at the time, And I realized like this actually overlapped really well with a lot of the work that we were doing from an acceptance and commitment therapy standpoint. And we were lucky enough to have supervisors at the time that didn't totally understand D&D, but were open enough to letting us to start some groups and really see where that was able to go.
And so I presume now we've seen at moments, I'm sure, games in your background when I've watched different discussions, and you can see stuff in your background now. So I'm
Yeah.
presuming for you, is it still a thing that you use to decompress in your own time very much?
Oh,
Like, do you
yeah.
practice what you preach?
It is. Yes, it's a huge part of my life. I have lived in enough different places and built friends in those places. And a lot of my best friends like do not live in the same state or country as me. And as much as I love a phone call while I'm walking the dog, games are a better or oftentimes like a better way to kind of stay connected. It's this shared activity. I'm someone who definitely has a hard time sitting still and just having a conversation. And so having this shared activity with somebody else really allows me to feel more engaged. My partner and I play a lot of games together. We've been able to build friendships through a couple of different communities, like Destiny 2 has been a huge part of where we have built networks. We have a friend coming to stay with us for PAX who we haven't met in person yet. We've been friends for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And so it's been a really lovely way for us to get to connect with other people and also, yeah, decompress, feel less stressed, sometimes feel stressed in different ways, but also come back to that space where games can be really predictable. And so having that space where you've got this sense of autonomy and predictability, especially when the world is on fire, can be really powerful.
Yeah, totally. And when I mentioned earlier about my WoW days and getting through a tough time personally, I can that comes to mind when you spoke about a friend you haven't met yet, because there was someone in my guild that was really important at the time in those online chats when you're all on TeamSpeak and you're waiting for everyone to res and all that kind of stuff and you're gathering. And it was only years later, even after we'd finished playing WoW, that we actually got to meet in real life, like years and
Mm-hmm.
years down the line. And so that hug was just so powerful. It's hard to explain and I'm getting a bit emotional just thinking about it, because we'd spoken so much for years online, and then for it to become real and tangible was amazing. But yeah, I'm going to stop now because I'm going to get all watery on you.
It's
So
really important. And I think there's this kind of myth that like online friendship, I think we're getting out of this myth a fair amount, especially. I think the pandemic actually really helped that in some ways, where people who were not necessarily into games or weren't interested in connecting online had to do it enough that even if it wasn't their favorite thing, there was a greater recognition that real communities and friendships can be formed in online spaces.
yeah, totally. So that's how games impacted you growing up, and then it's heavily part of your life today. As well as your own personal work, you do work with Take This. And how
Mhm.
does your experience and your skills play into what you do? I believe you're a workshop consultant currently.
Yeah, I've had a couple of different roles with Take This, which is a mental health and games focused nonprofit. We're actually the oldest mental health and games focused nonprofit that exists. And we serve both the games industry as well as the games community. On the community side, that looks like a lot of education at conventions like PAX and MomoCon. We recently had the opportunity to support through some of our AFK program, which is like a supportive quiet room at conventions where you can get away from the sensory overwhelm, do some coloring sheets, have a supportive ear if needed. Obviously, no therapy services are provided, but we have trained volunteers that are designed to help just generally provide a supportive space. We had the opportunity to work with Pokemon recently at their World Championships as well as the National Championships. And that was also just really awesome to get to see that community all in one place. As well as on the industry side, we do a lot of workshops and trainings for studios and for developers around things like community building, community resilience. One of my roles at Take This has also been specifically focused around research and better understanding how developers are thinking about and the tools that they have to help keep their communities safe. Anytime you have a space that's good for building friendships, and this is both online and offline, right? This is also physical sports and religious communities and scouting communities. You can also have people with bad intentions who can show up in those spaces with the intention to cause harm, or maybe not the intention, but the ability to cause harm. And so thinking about ways that we can support resilience of that community and pushing back against potentially toxic and problematic norms.
Yeah, it's a great organization. I imagine you have your hands full, but that's awesome. And for our listeners, you mentioned community. So when you think about potential toxicity in online spaces, obviously that's quite a big topic in itself. So is there anything that can be done to help foster healthier online communities? Because you mentioned that's kind of part of your thing, right? So
Yeah,
what, for people out there, is there anything they can do to help foster those heartfelt
absolutely.
communities?
One of the things that we think about is the way that norms get set in a space, right? Because norms are going to have a huge control over our behavior. I think there's often this idea that because of the anonymity of the internet, that is what just allows people to be toxic. But it's usually not just the anonymity, it's also what are people seeing around you. In the same way that if you go to a school or you go to a fancy dinner, you might be expected to use certain language or wear certain clothes. People are going to generally try and adhere, at least within a kind of confidence interval, around the behavior that they are seeing in others. And so if you're in lobbies regularly where you're hearing people use slurs or you're hearing a lot of insults, you may be more likely to engage in that kind of behavior. And so this is a space where we want to see like the norms or the expectations in a space are going to be, we want to see those kind of more pro-social. Also, if you are someone who has power in a space, whether you are a mod, whether you are a respected person, whether you hold identities that have more power or less marginalized in a space, being the person to step in and say, hey, we don't want that behavior here. Focusing really on the behavior itself as opposed to the person can be really powerful. We know that a lot of people will block or report problematic or toxic behavior, which is awesome. The challenge with those pieces is that in the moment, the behavior exists and then is not pushed back against, because blocking and reporting are both back end things. And so being able to step up and say, hey, like that wasn't cool, or that joke wasn't very funny, not trying to get into a big argument with the person, but pushing back or even sending a message to the person who had the hate directed at them to say, hey, that wasn't okay, can be really helpful ways of pushing back against those kinds of established norms in the space.
Yeah, no, I get it. And yeah, especially like you say, if you're a person of power within within whichever community it is, as someone who streams and stuff like that, it's and having your set guidelines as well up front, I think is a good having some kind of structure. Like people know if they come to my channel, for example, just because I'm someone that personally, maybe it's the very proper British English person that I am. I very rarely swear, if ever. So my chat room is clean because I
Mhm.
just don't, it's how I speak and I don't like those terms when around my channels. And it's just I think having whether that's your space that you want to provide, whatever it is, just having some kind of structure so that everyone knows where you're at as well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And when we
leading by
think,
example.
yeah, and I think there's sometimes this idea that, oh, of course, like Animal Crossing communities could be like positive and not full of toxicity, but Call of Duty communities definitely couldn't be. And while there's definitely a difference in terms of kind of general expectations of behavior, when we're thinking about playing Animal Crossing versus playing Call of Duty is like a realistic military style shooter. It's competitive. Animal Crossing is not. That doesn't necessarily mean that the community can't be healthy. It may mean that we have to engage in more explicit or intentional norm setting about like what counts as like appropriate banter versus like trolling, right? What counts as, oh, this is just like we're just poking fun at each other between friends versus we're engaging in bullying or hate speech. There needs to be a little bit often clearer lines drawn there in the way that we might be able to say, oh, in this community over in Animal Crossing or in this community, we're just going to say no cursing whatsoever, right? Whereas over here, we might say we want people to be able to curse, but we want to make sure that
Mm.
those curses are not directed or demeaning to other people.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. And yeah, I may not use colorful language, but I'm British and I watched it. Like I grew up in the 80s. So innuendo, my channel still has innuendo no matter how clean it
Yeah.
is. My brain was wired that way. No, I'm no shame. And so for listeners who use games to unwind or cope with stress, is there any research that reflects that is a thing? And are some genres, do you think, better for this than others, or is it just down to the personal taste?
Yeah, the research in this area is definitely still evolving. We definitely saw a little bit more of it show up. Again, there's in some ways, the pandemic was really good for games research. Game can create a sense of autonomy and control. And so if my life is really unpredictable and I am able to go into a game and like I am able to get this sense of mastery because I'm doing well, things are predictable, I know what's happening, that can help build back up these reserves that I need to go deal with this really unpredictable world, right? Now, I could also use games as an avoidance tactic where I'm just like not paying attention to what's going on in my real world and I'm playing games for 18 hours a day. That's not going to be particularly healthy. But being able to go in and have fun and connect with people can be really powerful. And that can span genres. Now, if you find that you're going to be more activated by certain games, right? I've gotten into 4 years too late. I've gotten into playing Pokemon Unite recently. And like, I love it. It's super fun. And I need to stop playing Pokemon Unite at least 2 hours before I go to bed. Now I can engage in other kind of screen things, but I am focused and I am like, my heart rate is a little bit elevated and I am like really paying attention to what's going on the screen. And like, I'm trying to react quickly and understand. I'm also just learning a whole lot because I'm very new to the game. And so my brain is going to be pretty fired up. My body is going to be an amount fired up, which is still fine and healthy, but it's not going to help me go to sleep. Whereas I might be able to get away with playing something like Stardew Valley a little bit closer to my bedtime because I'm not having that same kind of quick reaction, really focused, really intense. Stardew Valley is going to be more predictable than who am I paired with Unite. Was this a really fun game? Was this a really challenging game? And so just being aware of the way in which we might need different games at different times for different things.
Yeah. No, I get where you're coming from. And for me, to put that I try and reflect things back just because it helps me make sense of it. And hopefully other people would be playing Destiny late at night sometimes to unwind, because even within certain games, there's tasks. So it might be that, okay, I'm in this world and yeah, if I wanted the stress time, I can go and do raid or whatever, but I'm just going to do my dailies and I'm just going to chill my way through the evening. And for someone like me and for someone like me as well, I don't have an inner monologue. I really struggle sometimes with, because there's no inner thought, like active inner thought process. It's just moods. It's like feelings. So I don't always know what's wrong with me until I go through the mood that I'm going through. And so the sitting down and just having that chill moment with a game that allows me to do a routine, whether it's dailies or whatever, and WoW or Destiny or something, it just helps bring my mood down into that balanced Zen state. Little insight into my world, but I think that's what you mean.
Absolutely. And that's a great example in terms of even within a game like Destiny, you've got, I'm just like going around the Cosmodrome, or I'm just like going around a space and like shooting ads, versus I'm doing like a quickly match, or I'm doing a ranked match, or I'm doing something like a raid. It is going to have different levels and it's going to hit different pieces, right? Am I looking to feel really competent? Am I looking to work really hard and then succeed? Do I need an easy win, right? What is the kind of thing that I am looking for?
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you mentioned about, obviously, it is a tricky slope. It can't all be positive. There is a risk sometimes that we use games for avoidance, as you mentioned earlier. And how do we differentiate potentially, or do people help differentiate between using games as a helpful tool as to going maybe too far, using it as a tool to push too far out of range as to what actually is healthy?
Yeah. So some of it has to do with just what else is going on in your life, right? So in the same way that like, if I do really like chocolate chip cookies, eat chocolate chip cookies very regularly. If I'm only eating chocolate chip cookies, that is going to be a problem. Not just necessarily because they're not particularly nutritionally dense, but also because the more chocolate chip cookies I eat, the less I'm going to be able to eat vegetables. So if I am playing games pretty regularly, if I'm playing games and it's getting in the way of me doing my work, that is going to be a problem. If it's preventing me from going outside and exercising, if it's preventing me from connecting with people, right? If it is preventing me from like working on tasks or things that I say are important to me, then that is going to be a problem, right? So when we're thinking about like how much games are too much, I tend to not to like to be like, oh, it's this many hours a day. Because if I'm going and I'm playing, for example, Unite, or I'm playing Marvel Rivals and I'm having a bad time, right? Like I'm getting tilted pretty quickly. Maybe I'm frustrated about something in my real life. It's showing up in the game. And I'm just having 2 hours of me being really frustrated and yelling at everybody on my team. That 2 hours is not a healthy 2 hours, right? If I'm spending those same 2 hours getting frustrated every once in a while, but like taking a break is needed and connecting with my friends or working on developing a new skill within the game, that's a really good 2 hours. And so thinking about looking at how much you're playing, but really focusing on like, how do you feel after you've played? Are you noticing that you are playing to try and achieve a sense of like numbness or kind of avoidance, as opposed to a sense of mastery or calmness or connection? Are you finding that when you start playing, you have a hard time stopping, or it's getting in the way of other things that are important to you, or more the things I would look for?
Yeah. No, it is important because obviously, and it's a tricky balance, I think, as well, because I want to make sure we always talk about it because I say this whole podcast is built on how great games can be, but like all things, you can have too much of a good thing. And I don't want to just be too one-sided. I want to make sure that we do remember to, yeah, touch grass, as the modern term would be, touch grass once in a while, because it does help. All right. So moving forward. Now, it's something I tend to ask all of the guests, and yet, ironically, you have a title that means you partly answered it along the way, because often I ask to people, especially if they're just gamers or streamers or whatever, if they were some kind of game doctor and they put a doctor hat on, then what game would they prescribe people as like their game
Oh,
prescription? Now, you actually have a doctorate.
I do
So,
have a doctorate. Yeah.
yeah. And I'll caveat this, obviously, for yourself, as you mentioned, this is not an actual medical prescription.
Yes.
But just on a personal fun level, like if
Yeah.
you could recommend one game to people, it could be something you play or whatever, just as what's your tonic?
Yeah. I think I would say like my general recommendation is going to be D&D, just because in terms of, or any other kind of like tabletop role-playing game, it does not have to be D&D, because of the opportunities for connection with other people, for collaboration with other people, for getting to engage in creativity and problem solving and improv in a safer, more structured way. That tabletop role-playing games are going to be my number one recommendation. On the video game side, though, there are video games that are being designed to help treat specific things. I don't like most of them for lots of reasons, including bad science around some of them. But in terms of like popular for fun games, I always recommend that people try out something that is like just a little bit outside their comfort zone, especially if they have someone or something that can help support them in that. And that could even be a game like Destiny 2, I think is a great example. I got into Destiny 2 when I had very little experience with first person shooters. And the game does a really good job of scaffolding from like relatively easy solo missions, the opportunity to play with other people on story missions, into those more competitive aspects of the game. Destiny 2 is not the only game that does that. Lots of games do, but it is an example I have a lot of experience with. So something that's going to be fun and something that's going to be new. And Destiny 2 was my gateway back into a lot more games and a lot more comfort with just picking up a game that I had less experience with.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, huge. Not so much now. All for good things when we speak about being healthy. There's times when I have to detach from
Yeah,
Destiny because I've been playing Destiny since D1 beta, and there's a lot of
that's fair.
there's hundreds of hours gone in, probably thousands gone into Destiny over the years, and I've at a point where I've had to just step back a little. It's too much, but I
We
know
have
that
different
I'm aware
seasons.
of that. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
cognizant of it, and I am taking action. So
Yes. And that's what you do, right? And I'm also in a pretty big break right now from Destiny and really enjoying like playing and engaging in games until I get distracted and bored and being okay with not finishing them.
yeah. And again, because we focus, I just want to make sure, because we focus on not just, or I try to make sure we focus on not just computer games, but tabletop and everything
Mhm.
as well. And I think a theme that's come up through this discussion and others a lot is as well, just especially through D&D, or whether you're playing D&D or Vampire the Masquerade or Daggerheart, whatever it is that you're now playing, it is that for me as well, because I'm a huge board game collector as well. My dining room is overflowing with board games, but they're nearly all cooperative. A lot of them. I have
Mhm.
very few competitive versus games because I
Yeah.
love that camaraderie of getting people around the table, working together as a team, and for me, almost standing back and seeing the joy of people coming
Yeah.
together and connecting. There's something, and it's like when you're the DM, right? If you've ever DM'd a game, sometimes just sitting back and watching the group and seeing them
Absolutely.
figure things out is just, it's just, I can't put it into
Yeah.
words. Like a euphoric kind of moment.
Oh, absolutely. And I love cooperative games in part because it allows me to play the games that I want with new players, because you've got so much more opportunity to just start playing and go, "Hey, I'm gonna help you." My dad is someone who is really great at strategy, but wants to be good immediately. And so when learning a new game is I'm not playing with my hand open to let you know what's happening, but also I'm going to ask you 18 million questions every time I take a turn to make sure I'm making like the perfect right turn. And he is learning. I find it excruciating. And so cooperative games remove that aspect. I also have really had a lot of fun recently with Wingspan and Wormspan and Finspan. the games that are technically competitive, but there's not a lot of interaction in the middle. So it's almost like you're getting like a little parallel play experience and then count the points at the end.
Yeah, I found that with Scythe as well. I've hardly ever played a game of Scythe where people actually meet in the middle of the map. Everyone's just off doing their own little things, but it's fine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I could go, honestly, I could talk about board games all night, but we have only so much time in the day. But maybe we'll chat again one day. That would be amazing.
Absolutely.
And so when you've already mentioned some things coming in the future that you're not so keen on in terms of the field of, should we say, game therapy? Is that a reasonable term?
Sure.
Is there stuff that you are excited about for the future, though, in terms of where we're heading, in terms of the power of games and things that, whether it's for yourself or just the industry?
Yeah, I obviously was not like the first person to use D&D in therapy. People have been using D&D in therapeutic contexts since the 80s, but we've definitely seen a really rapid explosion. So I've had the opportunity to teach a couple thousand people how to use D&D in therapeutic spaces. And so getting to see more and more research in that area, more and more people engaging with it. When I'm talking to people about using games in therapeutic spaces, there's often just less like confusion and pushback against the very concept of it, which is really exciting to see. I also do think that kind of that world of like digital therapeutics is where some of the like the video games that are designed. I think there's a lot of potential in that area. I just sometimes am frustrated by there's the researchers that have no money. And so like their games look bad over in this corner and sometimes aren't fun. Or you have the venture capitalist backed game designers over in this corner with less of the research connection. And so that's that again, it's not every single game, but I am hopeful in terms of seeing more of that connection between those. And there are conferences and communities that are very much designed to help bring those worlds together. Games for Change is a good example. And we've already seen some really positive impacts for using games in spaces like exposure therapy and those kinds of pieces. So I'm really excited to see where games can support, because like game designers are so good at teaching people how to do things, right? If you want people to play your game, you have to figure out how to teach people how to play your game. And so that is something where teaching people a new skill and making it fun and engaging is something that games does better than anything else. And so really being able to combine that with some of the therapy aspects, I think has just so much potential.
That sounds awesome. And last two questions as we round out today. So the first one, I probably should have prepped you for, but it's okay. Editing is a powerful tool.
Okay.
And if there was anyone who you could hear their Saved by Gaming story, you don't have to know them. It could be someone you would buy from a distance or you've read about or whatever. Is there anyone you'd be curious to hear their Saved by Gaming story?
It's a good question. I just don't know that I have a good answer. Some of the most powerful stories I've heard from people. I'm gonna give you an answer to a different question.
Okay.
So I had a client when I worked at the VA, so a military veteran in substance use treatment. They're in their 80s. They'd done a whole lot of drugs for a whole lot of years and joined one of my D&D groups. Had not really played games before, wasn't really interested in fantasy, was in the group because someone recommended it to them. And it was so powerful to watch this person go from not interested in fantasy, really struggling to figure out how they were going to fill the hole that like was in their life because they had pulled drugs out of that hole, right? So now there's this like gaping hole that they have to fill so that drugs don't go back in it. And over the course of just like 6 or 8 weeks, they became so invested in the group. They became really connected. And then they would come in and start telling stories about how a sci-fi movie came on and they sat down and they watched the movie. Because normally they would have been like, no, I don't care about fiction, right? So a sci-fi movie came on and they watched it and they were like, I was able to like connect with the characters. Like I was able to like emotionally connect with the characters. And oh, is this why people care about fantasy? Is this why people care? Like, this is really good. And so it was really amazing to get to watch this person develop this kind of whole new skill set and whole new interest in games and fantasy and fiction because of this kind of once a week for 2 hours D&D group for 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. Without giving me a specific name, that was a very good answer for a tale. I enjoyed. Don't get me wrong, I loved it. It was very good. You got out of that one very well.
Thanks.
And on an aside, and I'm aware that don't worry, we'll finish on time.
No
As
worries.
an aside, when we think about movies, it just got me thinking because for years I didn't realize, because as I mentioned earlier, I have no inner monologue. when you watch movies and the people have the voiceovers of their thoughts and things, I thought that was just a movie trope. I thought that was just like a movie device. I didn't realize, I just didn't comprehend that was a reflection of what how some people see hear the world, of whether it's themselves or whether it's a relative. Or I've been reading about it since, because I only learned it a few years ago, that this is a thing that people have voices in their heads. I was like, oh my God, what? So yeah, sci-fi all movies now are just completely different. It's overwhelming.
That's awesome.
Finally, so for the audience, this audience obviously, I hope, is pulling in people that feels like intuitively that games are positive. We talk about the positive power of play. Do you have one piece of actionable advice or key takeaway that you want people to remember from today's conversation?
Yeah, I think that the actionable takeaway that I want people to remember is to just encourage people to think a little bit more intentionally about the games that they are playing. And I'm not saying go on this big self-growth journey, but sit down for a couple of minutes when you're playing a game and think about, what am I getting from this game? When does this game make me feel better? When does this game make me feel more empowered? What are the kinds of games that help me cope in different kinds of situations? Because games can be a really important part of that kind of self-regulation and happiness toolbox, but they're much more powerful if we know what kind of tool they are and when they are the most useful.
Very, very well said. Thank you so much for today's chat. I honestly feel like we could have you on for a second episode at some point if you're not bored of my voice, because I feel like, thanks.
It's my favorite topic to talk about.
Me too. Strangely, I started a podcast and everything.
Weirdly. Yeah.
I know. So yeah, this has been awesome. And for everyone out there, before we sign off, just remember, obviously, we do have a Discord if you want to hang out there with us. And remember to check out all the other episodes. By the time you hear this, you will have already heard from other people that work with D&D. And we had an interview recently with Gary Coleman, who is the chairman of Games Therapy UK. They use D&D, working with veterans and everyone. So it's like a whole theme. Again, we're just hitting all the niches right here. So yeah. Wait, Elizabeth, do you want to mention where people can find you if they want to check in with you at any point? You don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is elizabethkilmer.com, and I work at Respect Psychological Services, or Respect Psych, which you can find online, as well as Take This. Take This is probably the best place if you care about following social media, because I largely do not exist in those spaces.
Okay, that's probably safe. That's probably a safe thing
better
to do
for my brain. Yeah.
Apart from this episode, we exist here. Anyway, just remember, people, whatever you're doing out there, remember occasionally, as we mentioned, to touch grass. Remember to hit save. It's very important. And until next time, stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
This show was brought to you by me, ziggychris. So thanks very much for listening. You know how to do podcast things by now. So if you liked this, push the button, tell your friends, do all that jazz, and we'll see you next time. Take care.